Hi there, Subaru owners. Today in your 2020 Subaru Outback Wagon, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Redarc's Tow Pro Liberty trailer brake controller. This comes in two different options. You can purchase it with or without the connector harness. I highly recommend that you get the connector harness because you're pretty much going to need it to be able to plug into the brake controller, and it gives you a nice pigtail to make all of your connections. In addition, if you only have a functioning 4-pole at the back, you're going to need a properly functioning 7-way, which we can upgrade and get everything we need to get our brake controller installed using kit Etbc 7 here at etrailer. And this is what our brake controller looks like when it's installed. That's right, it's just this small little knob here because the module is actually mounted behind the dash. You're never going to see it, and it's not in your way like traditional brake controllers where you're bumping your knee on it every time you get in and out. And what's cool about this brake controller is that it's completely proportional, just like many of the top manufacturers. You can adjust your sensitivity with the knob, and you'll know that it's working and you're connected when the blue light is on. Once you plug in your trailer, it'll be lit up. The knob here will allow you to adjust your sensitivity for the power output from 10 all the way down to 0. So we're at 0 now, and I'll press the brake. We have nothing. If we go up to 10, you can see that it is applying the brake there. And as we roll it off, you can see it go from red to blue as it's less application. We can also press in on the switch. It's a button here, and this will apply the brakes just like your manual slider would on other brake controllers. Since we were at 0 there, it doesn't really do a whole lot, but if we were to go up to 10, you can see it applying there. And you can use this if you have any sway events. You can just press on your button here, and that will temporarily apply the brakes at the back to help bring that trailer and pull it straight again with you. We'll begin our installation here at the back of the vehicle, first by doing just an inspection to see what the vehicle has. You want to make sure you've got a fully functioning 4-way connector. This vehicle's already got one. If you don't, you can purchase kits here at etrailer that will have everything you need to get a 4-pole flat trailer connector installed. If you've already got a 4-pole flat trailer connector installed, then we can get our brake controller installed by upgrading this to a 7-way connector using kit Etbc 7 here at etrailer. So now that we know we've got our 4-way connector available, we can go ahead and move on by getting our Etbc 7 kit installed, which will allow our brake controller to work. There's a couple of bolts here that hold the controller on. We're just going to remove those. It's a 7mm socket. They're usually not very tight. Sometimes you can just break them loose and then take them off by hand. So we'll just get these 2 bolts out of here. And then that'll just hang down. Our Etbc 7 kit's going to plug into the 4-way. We're just going to tuck this out of our way now because we're going to be mounting the 7-way right here to where the 4-way was mounted. So here we have our 7-way connector as well as the mounting bracket that it comes included with. I've gone ahead and just mounted the bracket onto the 7-way. You can see the bolts will slide through, and on the back you're going to secure it with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts. And this is the bracket where we're going to mount it up to the hitch. You can see one of the holes here I did have to elongate. Pretty much wherever one of the holes is, just to the inside of that hole, you'll want to drill another hole right next to it and then just attach those 2 holes together, and that way it'll match up with our factory mounting location. So we're going to go ahead and get it mounted up here. I'm going to go ahead and plug in our 4-way just because it'll be easier to plug it in now, just because of how tight it is up in here. So just grab these 2. You can see they plug right together there, and we're going to try to keep these 4 wires to where they're still accessible because we are going to need to hook these up. These 4 wires here, we're going to be using 3 of them. The last one here, this yellow one, we're not going to use. You can if you want. This is for your reverse light circuit. You can just tap into the reverse lights on the vehicle to add that in. In most cases, this isn't going to be necessary for anything though, and most trailers don't have reverse lights. It's really mainly for your boat trailers and stuff to prevent the brakes from locking up when you're backing down into the boat dock. We also can get rid of the mounting bracket that was on there. It's just large, it just comes off of there. It's kind of in the way. It's really not necessary. And then we're just going to peel back a little bit of this tape here so we can get a zip tie underneath of it. So we can zip tie these 2 connectors together so that way it can't come undone. Now we're just going to take our hardware that comes included with our kit, or you could reuse the factory hardware. Doesn't matter really which one, and we're going to mount it back up into that mounting location. I chose to use the hardware that comes in the kit just because the bolts are a lot shorter. It's a little bit easier, but the factory hardware will work just fine. And then we'll just tighten them down with a 10mm socket. So we're just going to push up those connectors for now. The 4 flat, that's part of your Etbc 7 here. This is just going to slide into the side of your bracket right here. There's a little slot cut out in it. So we're just going to push that guy up in the slot there. And then we've got our wires we still need to connect right here that we're going to focus on now. So our blue and our black is the first ones we're going to focus on. These wires need to be routed up to the front. Our black wires are power wire, and our blue wire here is our brake signal wire that's going to come from the brake controller. Included in your kit, you're going to get a large duplex wire. That wire we're going to connect here and then route up to the front of the vehicle. So I've gone ahead and taken the duplex harness that we've got here, and I stripped back some of the duplex on it. I just used my razor knife to cut that off of there to expose the 2 wires inside. You're going to have a white and a black. We're going to be keeping black and black together, but we'll be connecting the white to the blue. To do this, we're going to strip back the ends of each of these wires, but we're also going to cut off these ends and strip those back. You can use the ones that are pre-attached on there if you want to, but I highly recommend upgrading to heat shrink butt connectors, which will seal up and keep out any moisture, ensuring a long-lasting connection here at the back. You can get heat shrink butt connectors here at eTrailer. We'll then just take our new heat shrink butt connector here. We're going to slide it over the ends on our 7-way, crimp it down, and since this is the blue wire, we're going to bring it over here to the other side and connect it to the white one, and then we'll do the same thing with the black wires. Now that we've got our butt connections made, we'll use our heat gun to shrink them down. Try to avoid blowing onto your plastic with the heat gun because it can deform it. Now that we've got these 2 connections made, we need to connect our white wire, which is our ground wire. This is just going to ground right under the chassis, and we're actually just going to use a self-tapping screw to run it right in here. We don't want to run it into the trunk pan inside the vehicle. If you put your finger over the top here, you'll feel that this is a lip that runs around the outside of the trunk pan. We want to make sure we're going through the lip so that way we don't cause any leaks inside the vehicle. Just going to slide our self-tapper through the ring terminal, and then we'll use our 10mm socket to run it right on through. So I've gone ahead and just tucked up the excess wires right up into the opening here. We'll eventually take a zip tie and zip tie them up in there. We're going to wait until we're all done so that way we know we don't need to come back in here and cut any zip ties to make any changes. The yellow wire we just poked back in there because we're not connecting that one, but we already discussed on how you would if you needed that wire. Next, we're going to be routing the wire, our duplex wire, up to the front of the vehicle. So I went ahead and just took it above the paneling here, kind of going around the little attachment points so that way it stays above this panel. Then we're going to run down the side of our trunk pan up over our suspension components. And from here we just continue routing it forward. We're going to go above any panelings that we can find. This one here, I went ahead and pulled it down some. And to pull it down, there's just a few push pins that hold it on. And we just keep going down our panel all the way here to the front. Once we get up here to the front of this panel, we can make our connection to go up to the engine compartment. And all I did here is I ran a Fishwire down. It's just a piece of Airline tubing. And it's right up in there. I poked it through here. This way you can grab it, and I put some electrical tape on it. And that way we can go back up top and pull that piece of Airline tubing to pull it up. If you don't have Airline tubing at home, one of the things that works great is a metal coat hanger. You can undo it, push that down, tape your wire to it, and then use that to pull it up. So now we're back up top in our engine compartment. We're grabbing that pull wire that we talked about here. And we're just going to pull our wire up. And after you've got it pulled up, it's a good idea to just go back down below and just give yourself a double check to make sure that the wire did, in fact, pull all the way up. So I can feel now that I'm caught, and I know that there's a little bit more down there. It's not uncommon for the wire to twist up and get hung up. So you just go down there, untwist it, and just keep pulling until you can verify that it's all the way up. So I went ahead and routed the wire across. You'll see there's some push pins right here. You can actually take your zip ties and poke it underneath the plastic, and then it can pop out next to that push pin. Is kind of just what I did. The zip tie just comes out from underneath of it. And that way you can zip tie it along the edge back here. Once we get it routed across, we're actually going to take the Duplex from this point on and we're going to cut off all the sheathing all the way to the end. So we're just going to take our razor knife and we're just going to, right there, just poke down in there, and we're just going to follow this down. And you're probably wondering, what is all this here? This is some extra fish wire that I've got, and we can go ahead and talk about that while I'm cutting this. If we focus off to the left just a little bit over there, the grommet is right here. It's going to pass into the firewall, and I've already prepared it. I've pushed this Airline tubing. Again, you can use that metal coat hanger if you've got it at home. And I've pushed it through the grommet until it poked out the other side on the inside. We're going to be heading in there in a few moments once we get this Duplex cut out, and you'll be able to see where it comes out in there. We've got our two wires now separated out. The black wires are power wire. This is going to power up the 7-way at the back, and it's going to get power from circuit breakers. You'll receive 3 in your kit. I've gone ahead and mounted them up here. You only are going to use 2 of the 3. They are 3 different sizes. You'll get a 20, 30, or a 40 amp. You'll want to make sure that the 40 amp is used for the circuit that runs to the back for your 7-way. For your brake controller, you have the option of a 20 or a 30, depending on the requirements that you have for that. If you've got a larger trailer that has multiple axles, you probably want to go with the higher amp fuse because it has to send output to all of those brakes for each axle. We went ahead and put the 30 on here. I know the customer's likely not going to have a trailer that large. He's going to be pulling with his Subaru, but this way he's got it just in case he needs it for whatever reason. So I went ahead and just routed it over alongside our battery, back behind the module here. We're going to cut our wire. I always like to leave just a little bit of excess. And we're going to be attaching this to the silver post on our circuit breakers. The silver post is always the output. The bronze post is your input. That's going to be our battery source for the bronze side. So we cut it to length. I went ahead and stripped it back. You're going to have some small ring terminals included in your kit. I'm going to slide those on, and these are for attaching it to those circuit breakers. Just crimp it on here. We'll then remove the nut off the silver post on the 40 amp breaker. Slide on our wire, and then we're just going to reinstall the nut. And you can get a closer look here of how I mounted up the circuit breakers. You'll receive self-tapping screws with the circuit breakers. So you'll just run those right in. This is a nice good spot here at the very front of the car, just in front of the battery and your washer bottle here. There's plenty of room to get in there. And you know that nothing's going to hit them, especially like your hood when you close it, because this is a power source, so that would cause a short and you get some sparks. But you can see here this is the stop from where the hood hits, so there's no chance that the hood can ever contact down here because of our stop there. With the excess black wire that we cut off, I went ahead and stripped back one end and attached it to the other circuit breaker. This one we're going to route inside so we can connect it to our brake controller to power it up. So I just routed it kind of similar to the other one, and that wire that we talked about before that I'd run through, I just used some electrical tape to tape it to that, along with the white wire, because that also has to go inside. So now that we've got it poked in there, we're going to head to the inside where we're going to pull it through. This is just like on the outside. As you're pulling this through, you want to just check yourself, because you're probably going to feel like it stops, like you're out of wire, but there's a good chance that the excess wire here wrapped around a component. You'll need to come out here, unhook it, and then continue pulling it through. So here's our wire. You can see the harness actually pokes through the firewall right here, and it just poked right out of it. What I did was, when I pushed the fish wire through here, after I pushed it through, I looked for the bulge of the fish wire, because I couldn't quite get it to bust through the rubber. In many cases you can just push it through the rubber, but it's pretty thick. So once I saw the little bulge of where the fish wire was, I just took my razor knife and I cut a little slit so I could get it pulled through. So we're just going to then just pull the wire here, and it's pretty normal for it to be tough once you get to where your wires are. There we go. We've got our wires passed on through now, so we can go ahead and remove it from our fish wire, and we're going to continue pulling this white wire through until it's all the way through. The black wire is significantly shorter because it's just that little excess we had, so this one might stop and not get hung up, but our white one here likely will. And there it stops, so I'm just going to double check it. If everything's good outside, we've got it all pulled in. So we need to find a spot to mount our brake controller. We've decided to mount ours right here to the ductwork running across. We just use zip ties and ran it around the brake controller. There's little slots on each side, and wrapped it around the ductwork. We made sure not to cover up the vent openings when mounting it here. There is one little slit right here, but the majority of all the larger openings are unblocked. Now we'll need to wire up our harness. There's 4 wires here on our harness. We've got a black, a white, a blue, and a red. The black is going to be our power, and the black wire that we routed inside, we actually connected to that. I'm going to move this panel right here because you can actually see the connections better. This just pulls right down. I recommend pulling it down when you're working on it. Give yourself some more room. And I actually tucked up the connections right underneath that panel here to hide them. So you can see here the black wire we routed in is this thick black wire. We connected it to the black wire from our harness. Just butt connected it with the included butt connectors. The blue wire here from our harness attaches to the white wire that we routed inside. That's our brake output that goes to the back. And then we have 2 wires left. We have our ground wire and our brake wire. The ground wire is the white wire here on our harness, and this actually just routed it up over the air box, connected it to a ring terminal, and attached it right to the stud here next to the gas pedal. And our last wire is the red wire. You'll see that there's a red wire that goes into a blue connector. What that is a quick splice. You'll receive one in your kit. The way the quick splice works is you'll open it up, it just flips open, and then on the inside you'll see there's one slot on the side. You're going to slide that over the brake wire in your vehicle. That's going to be found on the stoplight switch, which is if you just take your brake pedal and follow it straight up, you'll see this plunger that's sticking out. When you press on your brake pedal, you'll see the plunger poke out. That's your stoplight switch right there. So you'll want to peel back some of the insulation, slide your quick slice over the brown wire that's on that stoplight switch connector. Then there's one hole that doesn't pass all the way through. That's where you're going to poke in the red wire from your harness. Then just take a pair of pliers and squeeze the small metal tab down into place. That's going to connect the 2 wires together. Then just fold the cover back over and snap it into place. I'd show you, but it's very tight up in there, and if I put my hands in there, you won't see nothing but my arms. Disconnecting the connector off of your brake pedal can make it easier to make your connection. Make sure you plug it back in after you disconnect it though. The vehicle won't start if it's not plugged in. So now that we've got all of our connections made, we can take our harness here and plug it into our brake controller. We're almost done. And the last step here, we need to mount our control knob. And you can mount this wherever you'd like. Our customer happened to have an open slot here. You may or may not. This depends on the options and accessories that you have on your vehicle. You may have an accessory that's taking up this slot. And if that's the case, you can mount it really anywhere you want. It's just a nut that goes through to mount it. You have to just drill a small hole for it. We'll take the little knob off here so you can see. And you'll just have to drill a hole for the switch. The nut will pass through and you can tighten it down. There is a small hole you need to drill just above it for the LED indicator to pass through. We were able to mount ours just right onto that switch assembly again because that was open right there. And you get the switch assembly out if you have a similar setup where you have an open switch. If you just pull this cover down, you can reach in the back side and push it out from the back. So we're actually going to just pull this cover off of here so we got a little more room to work. We're going to plug all the factory connections back in, and then we're going to route the harness here over towards our module. You'll also notice the harness has a straight end on one side and it has an angled end on the other. And this really just depends on you, which one works best for your location where you're putting your switch. For us, putting the 90 degree on the switch side is going to work out better. So I'm just going to route this through. And then I'll be routing it towards the module, and we're going to plug all these back together. And then we'll head back outside to make our final connections at the battery, because you don't want to make those connections until you've finished your installation, so you don't accidentally cause any shorts. We then just take the other end of our connector here and plug it into our module. At this point, everything on the inside here is all done. So before we put our panels up, we're going to go outside and finish up the power just to make sure everything's good there. Then we can clean up any components and stuff we've removed and zip tie any loose wiring. So now we're going to take the rest of the white wire that we had in our kit. We're going to be using this to finalize our connection between our circuit breakers and our battery positive. We're just going to be going from here to here. We'll use the small ring terminals on the bronze posts, and you'll have larger ring terminals that we'll be using over here on the battery side. So I went ahead and hooked them up. I used a 12mm socket to remove the battery positive nut here I slid on the larger ring terminals that I crimped onto the white wire over this stud, and then tightened it back down. And on the opposite end, we just connected to those bronze studs up here, and then all these were tightened down with a 3/8 socket. Now that we've got all of our connections made, at this point it's just zip tying up any loose wiring and then reinstalling any components that we have left that we removed to make the installation easier. So now we're just going to ride around on our test course, applying, starting and stopping the brakes for about 20, maybe 30 times. But that's helping it learn its direction of travel, because that inertia, it feels that movement, it wanting to be thrown towards the front. And if you actually have a trailer plugged in at the time, it will turn the light on the unit, and it will flash at you between blue and green, and the intervals that they flash between one another will progressively get faster as you're learning it. So you'll see the speed at which it flashes is going to change, and that lets you know that, hey, you're making progress towards getting this properly calibrated. So out here on the test course, it actually only took about 8 times, but you can see now that it's turned to a solid blue color. And we're at 0 on the setting, but if we increase it, you'll see that it will apply the brakes turning red there, showing that it's applying them. And that completes our look at the installation of the Tow Pro Liberty on our 2020 Subaru Outback.